Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions today during this presentation, please type them into the Q&A icon located at the bottom toolbar, and we'll answer them at the end of each presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. I'd like to welcome everybody to the June 14th edition of Crop Talk. And on today's Crop Talk, we're going to start with, I'll give just a brief update, and then we'll have the crop scouting panel. We've had a few things happen the past week, and I think we'll be a couple of us talking about, assessing some of the damage to crops, and not just what's happened in the past week, but we're getting into summer storm season, and I think it's maybe just a good reminder to people as to, if something does go through, how to go through and check your crop and see what kind of damage has occurred. So we're going to do that, and then there's been some questions that have come in, so we're going to answer the questions and go from there. So just to get going here, as I mentioned, some of the summer storms have begun, and we'll talk a bit about that today. Seeding is pretty much complete throughout the province. There's still the odd producer. I was actually talking to one yesterday that was still looking at seeding some silage or green feed, and I think some of those areas where it was a little bit wetter in the spring with the dry conditions we've been having, some of those spots have dried up, and now guys are going back and trying to fill them in, get something growing in there, and use up some of the moisture so they're can kind of reclaim some of those areas. So I think some of that stuff is happening, and we're also going to be seeing maybe a few acres needed to be reseeded because of the recent storms that have gone through. Boy, the crop's advancing fast with the early seeded cereals tillering right now. Some of the earlier canolas cabbaged out already, and which is great because we're getting to the stage now with the canola crop where a lot of the flea beetle problems that we've been worried about are going to be ending shortly, because they just won't be able to keep up to the crop, as well as just the fact that we're getting to that time where the crop's that far ahead of it that it's going to be keeping ahead. Soybean emergence has been pretty good in general. There are some places where we've had some issues with some seeds sitting in some drier ground. It is starting to emerge now after a few of these rains, so we're going to have some crop that's going to be a little bit uneven. It's pretty good in general. We've been struggling with spraying, whether it be the heat and the wind, so that's been a problem, I guess, but we've had a couple of good days. The last 2 days have been pretty good weather. The wind hasn't gotten to be too strong in most areas, so a lot of producers were able to cover a lot of acres and catching up with a lot of the in-crop spraying. So I think that's a good thing. And fungicide application is just around the corner. Talked to a couple of producers with winter wheat, as the winter wheat is just in kind of late flag leaf to early head emergence in a lot of cases. A lot of producers are starting to watch the winter wheat crops and getting ready to apply a fungicide if required. And we're looking at spring wheat in a week's time, might be getting closer to the flag leaf stage, or not too far off flag leaf stage already. So it's definitely going to be elongating. So we're going to be seeing some spring crops, cereal crops that are going to be getting closer. So I think that's going to be the next on the agenda, is watching for fusarium and any of the other leaf diseases that might be an issue throughout the growing season here. And I guess last, I have been talking to a few guys in some of the drier areas and starting to get some reports about some grasshopper activity speeding up in some of those areas. some areas have not received a lot of rainfall, and just by coincidence, some of those areas tend to be our lighter lands and our drier areas. So kind of prime area for grasshoppers. So I'm talking to a few of those producers that are saying that starting to see a lot of activity in the grass and grasshoppers moving around. Just a couple slides on kind of where we were last week to where we are this week. And the picture in front of you is canola field. The last week I had up, it was nicely rowing it, and this week the leaves of cabbaging out really good. So it's amazing how fast some of these crops can start growing when we get enough moisture and good heat and humidity, I guess, which is helping the crops grow fast. They're growing pretty much 24 hours a day with evening temperatures staying up there. So you notice it for sure in the corn crop. It's virtually growing as you're out in the field. So definitely good growing conditions right now. And another picture of the same pea field from last week to this week. So definitely filling in the areas, and pretty soon the crop will be intertwined enough that it'll be basically one solid mat of peas. So definitely good to see, and good for weed competition too. So another good part about this time of year is when you start seeing crops fill in and cover the ground. And in a picture of a wheat field that last week was, you could definitely see a lot more space between the rows. This crop is tillering out and filling in those spaces. So again, it's won't be long before it'll be a mat of green there. So that's good to see. And being that the crop is growing fast, it's just amazing to see how many stages it's going through in a week's time. So again, something we'll be talking a little bit more about as we get going through the panel. So with that, just a brief update there, and I think we'll be bouncing back and forth to talk about the different crop stages as we go through. But the crop scouting panel today, and I guess the first question I think that we should maybe look at is I asked Allison Sass to come on and talk a little bit about the storm that went through the Southwest here this past week. Maybe a little talk about the weather that we can maybe expect over the next little while, and maybe what our soil moisture situation is like right now. So Allison, are you on?
Yes, I'm here, Lionel.
Great.
I put together a few slides, so
Perfect.
just bear with me while I share my screen. Sorry for the delay here. Okay. And can you see my screen now?
You bet, Allison.
Okay, oops. And just 1 second, I need my, sorry about this. One more quick second, I shared the wrong thing. I'm lost without my notes, so. Okay. Yeah. Okay. There. How are we now?
You're perfect.
Okay, I give everyone a chance to have a good sip of their coffee. So I guess I'll start by mentioning some of the data that we saw during the big storm we had last Wednesday, June 7th, in the Rivers area. So we have a few stations around that area, one station pretty close to the town of Rivers. And at our station, the maximum wind speed that we observed there was 101 kilometers per hour. And that was at about 6:54 p.m. And the total rain that we saw for the storm was 32.5 millimeters. And that all occurred within about an hour and 15 minutes, that 32 millimeters. Rivers also received some rain really early in the morning on June 7th. So the total for that day was 42.8 millimeters. And what this graph shows, I just wanted to show the variability of precipitation just to illustrate that these storms can be very isolated. And it's really hard to predict rainfall amounts with these storms and where these storms are going to hit. So this graph is showing the 4 stations in the Rivers area. So we have one in Rivers, one in Hamiota, one in Kenton, and one in Forest. And you can see the River Station definitely received the most rain on June 7th. And the other 3 stations barely recorded any precipitation. So they did record some. And again, because the legend has to capture that 25 millimeters in the 15 minutes, we can't really see it. But these stations are probably less than 30 kilometers away from one another. And so to show that how variable that rainfall can be. And then we did receive some rain the following day as well. So Rivers, Kenton, and Forest received more than 5 millimeters of rain, and Hamiota also received a little bit. So again, just something to keep in mind during these the stormy season is that precipitation can be really variable, even over really short areas. To touch on the soil moisture conditions, so these are conditions as of June 11th, so Sunday. This is the 0 to 30 centimeter depth, and it's showing that there's quite a variation on soil moisture throughout Agro-Manitoba. The central regions around Elm Creek, Carmen, Altona are showing dry or very dry in some areas. And this is like, again, in the top surface layers of soil. And then in those regions where received some of that rain around Kenton, Rivers, down in the southwest as well, we're seeing wetter conditions along with wetter conditions along the west side of Lake Manitoba. And at the 0 to 120 centimeter depth, we're seeing the conditions are wet to very wet for most of the province. There are a few areas where it's a little drier and more optimal relative to field capacity, but for the most part, it's a little wetter. So it's the surface layers that we're seeing drying out. And then as that, any rainfall we get percolates through the soil, that's when we're seeing it moisture at the deeper depths. And one thing that Lionel asked me to touch upon, and I did a little bit of research on, is the impact of smoke on our weather. So there's a really good article in the Manitoba Cooperator that goes into a little more depth from someone with a little more atmospheric expertise than myself. But in a nutshell, the impacts of smoke are really variable on weather. It depends a lot on where the smoke is coming from and the height in the atmosphere. So higher smoke might not have a large impact on our weather, but the lower the smoke is, the more impacts we see. And one of the main impacts is that the smoke particles scatter the sunlight and doesn't let as much sunlight reach the surface. And what this can result in is lower surface temperatures. We haven't really observed that lately in Manitoba. I did notice it overnight last night when I'm in the Winnipeg area, smoke got really heavy yesterday evening and you could really feel those temperatures drop. Also, as a result of this less temperature coming down to the surface, is it actually usually leads to a more stable atmosphere, and this decreases the formation of clouds and precipitation. So, and this isn't all the time, every situation. Again, it's very variable and difficult to predict. But quite often we see that there's less rainfall occurring and accumulating during these times where we have smoke in the atmosphere. And this image that I have here is actually today at around 9 o'clock a.m. The prediction from a website called windy.com, which is really good for visualizing forecasts, and you can choose a variety of forecast models. And they actually have an aerosols predictor as well. So we can see here's some of those big fires in Quebec and some in Alberta. We're seeing where those fires are originating, and the redder the colors, the more aerosols that are in the air. And it really gives a good representation of how some of those aerosols are moving. And you can follow a prediction or the model prediction for the next few days. So it may or may not, depending on how um, the winds progress and systems, etc. We may see some of those impacts with temperature or may not. As far as the other forecasts go, 3-day forecasts are seeing possible rain in the central and east regions, which is shown here. Again, this is from the Windy website. Again, probabilities and amounts vary depending on what model you're viewing. And 10-day forecasts are predicting precipitation further in the west, so including Brandon, Melita, Swan River, and that's probably around Sunday, Monday. Again, that's pretty far into the future, so precipitation, again, is really hard to predict during the summer. And temperatures throughout the province are predicted to continue to be pretty warm, so the high upper 20s and low 30s over the next few days. So that's weather in a nutshell, and I'll pass it back to Lionel and crew.
Okay, Allison, before we leave, a couple questions.
Sure.
One is, how does wind affect the weather stations, or is there some factor that is used to compensate for measuring rainfall?
Well, our weather stations have a, it's called a altar shield that surrounds the rain gauge. And what that does is help to minimize the wind impacts on the catch of that rain gauge. So if you ever drive by one, it looks like a bunch of steel kind of teeth in a circle around the rain gauge. And that helps to cut down on the winds. In a situation like we saw in rivers during a big storm, when we're getting 90-kilometer plus winds, there's definitely going to be some undercatch of those gauges, and there'd be undercatch no matter what kind of rain gauge we use. And that's just part of our situation. Again, we're installing our stations out in the open to be representative of what we see in the fields. So you might see a different catch in a sheltered rain gauge that might be in your yard, for example. This is also can be an issue in the winter when we're trying to catch snow. Rain, it's not as much of a problem because the raindrops are heavier, but snow, because it tends to be lighter and drier, sometimes we have some undercatch with that, and that's something we're actually looking into over the next couple of winters, is investigating some additions to our stations that can help resolve that.
Okay, so those are they look like almost like wind chimes kind of above the.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
good. And then one more question, if you could go back to that ARIS map from Windy with the smoke.
Sure.
Okay, the question was, is that the jet stream then, as the way the smoke is going?
I'm going to say yes. Again, I'm not a atmospheric meteorologist that shows the jet streams as much. If you just bear with me, I might actually have it up on my computer. I actually can bring it up right here, and I can actually show you the live version, so you can see it now, and you see all the
Yeah.
little winds. So yeah, it's the jet stream and like kind of how the fronts are moving, etc. And if I press play, you can see it moving pretty slowly. So now we're at Wednesday afternoon, and then at the bottom corner here is the models that we're using. So there's about a
Okay.
40-kilometer accuracy to this model. And then if I speed it up a little bit, you can see, yeah.
Okay, that's a pretty cool map.
Yeah, it's really neat.
Good. Well, thank you, Allison.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so we're going to continue on, and the next question for the panel is going to go to Dennis Lang. And now we're going to get into learning or kind of a refresher on assessing damage, and Dennis is going to go through some of the pulse crops and talk a little bit about how we can assess the damage and recovery of some of those crops.
Alrighty, we're going to share my screen here now,
You bet.
and there we go. And we're gonna go full screen here. Give me a second, it should be up. Are we full screen now, Lionel?
Not yet. We got your presenter notes or your next slide there. So
Oh, interesting.
Go-
Hang on. Let's see
display
what-
settings, I think.
Yeah, head
Yeah.
up to the display settings and just swap it out, Dennis.
Okay, hang on a sec here. Where's my display settings in here now?
Right at the
Yeah.
top where you were, the screen you were just on.
Oh, hang on. This one here you're talking about?
I can't see right now.
Okay.
Just show screen again. Share screen again, or
Okay.
presenter
One sec.
mode or slideshow mode. Oh,
Hang on a second. Yeah, that's doing what it's supposed to here. So hang on. We're having some. Okay, we're gonna share my screen here. And we're gonna share this one. Okay, so we're sharing the screen here now.
so slideshow mode.
Yeah, and it goes to slideshow mode, and I need to
So at the
change some-
top of the slideshow mode, we're not seeing it quite yet, but I'm sure it's coming. There's a wording that says display settings on this. And then once you click the down arrow, you'll go swap.
Yeah, hang on. It's not giving me what I want it to give me here. Hang on a second here. It's 'cause
Okay,
There it is.
hold,
There it is.
stop. Okay, hold. So on the left where it says display settings,
I'm
take your
not seeing that
cursor.
actually. I'm not actually seeing it on my screen. Yes.
So
that's-
we're seeing right now your notes and your next slide. So is one of your screens showing that?
Hang on. No, it's just right now I'm just seeing my slideshow mode or my presenter or my notes mode here.
Okay, so can you see the word display setting at the top of that screen? There we go.
There you go. You're perfect now.
Okay, we're not going to touch it. Okay.
Great.
Okay. Now you should have a FieldP staging guide on the first.
You bet, Dennis. We're there.
Okay, so there we go. So I'm not seeing what you're seeing, but it's working, so we're not going to touch it. Okay. First thing I'm just going to touch on FieldPs. The staging comes into play when you're talking damage to the plant. You'll see here at the bottom here where you have your scale nodes. So if you've had hail damage, a lot of times what's happened is these other nodes, if you're at the fourth node stage where a lot of these were between 4 and 6, those are get knocked off, but then you're going to start to get regrowth from the scale nodes. Peas typically with hail damage at this time of the year, I'm not too concerned about it. This is a perfect example. We had a hailstorm that moved through on June 14th a few years ago, and it just basically took out all the crops at this one particular trial. The soybeans and dry beans were written off. There was just nothing left. They were stripped down to nothing. The peas, however, we left, and they were severely damaged, but the regrowth happened. Again, another shot of that storm. And then by mid-July, you could see how these peas really came back. And with that regrowth from the scale nodes, it really recovered well. The maturity was right on time with these peas in the fall. This was August 2nd. August 7th, field peas were at full maturity. And the data that we got off of that site, that was at the Boise Minto site, we actually got some pretty solid data. We had our check at 48 bushels an acre. It was a good trial, and it was a little lower than some of the other sites, but still quite respectable there. For soybeans, though, it's a little bit different. I pulled off some stuff from the Manitoba Pulse and Soybean Growers website, and I see there's a little bit of a glitch in the title. I apologize for that. Based on some of the preliminary results they've done over 4 site years, hail damages, if it's limited to the leaf defoliation at V2, V3, yield loss is pretty minimal. So right now we'd probably be in that early first to second trifoliate stage. So if you're just clipping off a few trifoliates, typically yield loss is going to be pretty minimal. However, there is some other data here that we'll look at a little bit more. Mouse is so sensitive today. What we're seeing here is if those cotyledons are stripped down to basically nothing at this point, that's where the highest yield loss is going to come into play. Here's an example. With soybeans, you will see that regrowth. So in this particular instance here, what we've seen is we've seen that trifoliate clipped off. Your axillary buds are here, and you're going to get regrowth from there. Again, they will recover to a certain degree, but if they're stripped off below those cotyledons, that's where the highest yield loss is going to be seen. Here's pictures of the regrowth from the cotyledons later in the season, and from both the cotyledons and the unifoliate leaves, you're seeing that regrowth happening. Now, with that being said, you're going to have to wait a little bit to really assess that damage. If you're going out the day after the storm, these things are going to look pretty brutal. You're not going to have any regrowth happening. You need to wait roughly about a week to see if you're going to start to see some regrowth from those areas. I would suggest calling your hail adjuster as well if you have hail insurance on there, just to make them aware of it. But with the soybeans, to a degree, they will recover as long as there's that ability for the axillary buds to kind of kick in. If you don't have that, then those plants are pretty much stripped down. I've seen over the years, I've seen hail happen at the early stages, where again, just stripping off a few trifoliates, the plants seem to regrow, not too much of an issue. But I've also seen the other extreme where there's just little sticks left, and in those instances, because those lower growing points are gone, there's really not much hope for recovery. So again, you need to wait a week to evaluate for regrowth. You also need to identify the growth stage that you were at before the hail, just to kind of give you an idea where things are at. But most of the soybeans are going to be between first to second trifoliate stage. And you want to assess what type of stand that you have left. That's probably the most important part, because if it's a herbicide tolerant variety, Roundup Ready, for example, if your stand is anywhere from 80 to 90,000 plants per acre that are still viable, you just want to keep those fields clean throughout the season. You still have some pretty good potential for yield, even at those low plant populations. I've seen it over the years. Once you start approaching that 50,000 plants per acre and lower, then your yield potential drops. I think over the years, the lowest I've ever seen a plant population that has produced a good yield was at 64,000 plants per acre. That was related to a seed quality issue where the grower had put in 200,000 seeds and only had 64,000 plants emerge. But because it was a herbicide tolerant variety, they were able to go in and keep it clean through the season and still save yield potential. So again, when you're looking at hail, look at the staging, look for regrowth a week later, and call your adjuster to make sure they're aware of it. Those are kind of the quick and easy points to adjust or to assess hail damage on soybeans.
Okay, good, Dennis. And I think the biggest concern right now is those kind of fields that were not in the middle of the storm, but kind of on the edge. So we're seeing some plants that are basically just sticks, like you mentioned, and then some plants where we will still have the cotyledons, and I guess the 90,000. So if a guy was to go out and count per square meter or per square foot, how many plants should you be looking at?
Well, if you probably the best way to do it, I always like to use my hula hoop if you're looking at solid seeded stands, that 28.25-inch hula hoop. If you're getting in that hula hoop, if you're a normal stand would be 14 plants in that 28.25-inch hula hoop. You're looking at that would be 140,000 plants. So if you only had 9, you're at 90,000 plants. I usually like to do it over a little bit bigger area rather than just a per square foot. You need to do a little bit bigger area to really assess the damage. So,
okay, good. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here now, Lionel.
Yeah, I grabbed it. I got another question for you, Dennis, and I sent you this slide this morning. I was in a soybean field yesterday, and we're seeing on the lower leaves, I guess the unifoliates, where the had some browning or bruising on the leaf, and I was just wanting your opinion as to what you thought that was.
Well, we've had some pretty breezy days in the last couple of weeks here. Because we're seeing on the leaf margins here, I'm attributing that to more wind damage and just soil moving around, beating up those lower leaves. When you do look at that, these plants here, you're starting to see the some of the newer growth yellow off a little bit there too. So I'm thinking there's a bit of a transition into nodulation yet. I would assume that at this point, we're not seeing much nodulation, but we're also going to start to see some iron chlorosis start to happen in the near future here as well. Even on drier years, we've seen iron chlorosis show up in fields. A lot of times what ends up happening is you have previous years with higher moisture levels, and that salt gets moved to the soil surface, and then you get a dry spring and the water dries up and leaves the salts behind. So we're probably going to see some iron chlorosis over the next couple of weeks here as well. But in this case here, those lower unifoliates there, that to me, that I would just attribute that to wind damage, because I'm seeing that in a few different fields as well. So.
Okay, yeah, no, that made sense. I kind of thought it was environmental issues too. So good. Thanks, Dennis. Okay, I'm gonna go through a few slides here. Anne couldn't make it to the meeting today, so she sent me some information regarding hail damage on cereal crops, and we're going to look at spring wheat first. And I guess one of the things about the cereal crops, they can, and I guess are able to withstand a lot more damage, it seems, from hail, especially if they're in the right stage. And so prior to stem elongation, the growing point is below the soil surface and will likely not be damaged too much by hail. So, and I think that's what we're seeing. Hail damage during the jointing or the boot stage can be a little harder to assess. So the jointing or boot stage is when you've got your kind of your stem elongation and your head moving up the plant. Spikes can still pollinate and fill, and fill, and regrowth from new tillers can occur. So at that point, it's a little bit harder, but I think any of the damage that has occurred so far in any of the cereal crops would have been in a where the growing point was still below the soil surface. As the wheat advances, at the time of hail, you get greater yield loss, and yield reduction from hail occurs. Greatest yield reduction in hail occurs from the milk stage. So there's just some a chart for as to what you see in yield reductions, and kind of makes sense as the head is up there, and if anytime you get any damage of the below the head, or as you see in these ones where the stalks are bent over, and these were taken last year as a hailstorm went through a little bit later in the season, and the heads were up the plant already. if it's broken below the where the head is, those aren't going to develop. The thing there is we'll still see the tillers usually will come back, aren't affected. So those are the ones that are going to make your crops. So we were before this stage, so I guess we're okay for this storm right now. For oats and barley, they usually tiller better, than wheat crop will do. So a lot of producers have experienced that, where we get a hailstorm or even sometimes an early frost, and those crops tend to just tiller out more and make compensate themselves for that. But as long as with the stages we were in right now, we're not going to see a whole bunch of damage to oats and barley. And the last slide I think she sent was for corn, and early season hail when growing point is below the soil surface will result in very little yield loss. And the growing point is below the soil surface until after the V5 stage. So I think when we did the crop report this week, the growth stages range from V1 to V6 for the earliest seeded fields. So we were just in the point where the growing point was still below the soil surface. And again, any damage to the corn would be mostly just leaf damage, and the crop would continue growing. Once the growing point is above the ground for corn, it is definitely more vulnerable to hail damage. And basically from that point until it starts to tassel it's vulnerable. But also during tasseling, it could be or would be the most vulnerable, because that is when it's flowering and it's pollinating the cob. So to lose your tassels would definitely be a major issue in a hailstorm. After tasseling, the hail causes progressively less yield loss as the plant approach maturity, and basically yield loss can be estimated by determining percent leaf defoliation. But really, after tasseling, a lot of times we don't see a lot of damage or yield loss to corn, unless it's a major storm where a lot of the leaves are taken off. Going to talk a little bit about canola, and I think the biggest thing for canola is where I've got the arrow pointed right there. As you start and watch canola after the storm, and Amir grabbed this picture of some of the canola that was in some of that area, and as you can see, there is green growth in the center of that plant. So that plant is coming back. And I think the biggest thing is to look at that plant and say, okay, this one's going to make it. But then when you look at the one next to it, it seems to be struggling quite a bit more. And now it's going to come down to determining how many plants you have per square foot to see if you have a viable crop left. And approximately 3 to 4 plants per square foot is what you'll need to get an average crop. And I think that's going to be the tricky part in some of the areas that were hit pretty hard, but are on the border line of where the storm went through. But canola can usually come back, but I think in some cases where the storm was bad, I think a lot of them got hit pretty hard. So I hear there's going to be some reseeding of soybeans and canola in some of those areas. I haven't heard of too many cereal crops right now, but again, it's going to depend on your location as to when the storm goes through. So for canola, canola is a fairly good crop to come back. We've seen it come back from flea beetle damage. We've seen it come back from hail damage. We've seen it come back from frost. So definitely keep an eye out on that. And see how it's responding to regrowth. So the question has come in, and what is the maximum temperature expected at the soil surface during peak heat or hot sunny days? What's the impact on emerging seedlings in almost dry soils? Allison, are you still on?
I am.
Okay, could you maybe make a comment about the first one, about the maximum temperature expected at soil surface during peak heat on hot sunny days?
I'm going to say just off the top of my head, it depends on a few things. So if we're talking bare soil, it depends a lot on the color of the soil. So darker soils will absorb more heat than a lighter colored soil, as well as like the texture. So if it's packed, that'll have an impact as well. I can't give a number again off the top of my head, but it's something I could look into a little further and see kind of what the soil temperatures are that we see in Manitoba on those days are.
Yeah, and we probably have the sensors in the stations that could probably, if somebody wanted to, they could call up their station and they would be able to watch the temperature during the day, or is that possible, or?
Yes, yeah. So our we have two soil temperature sensors, and the one that's closest to the surface is 5 centimeters below the surface. And with those maps, you can't, or sorry, with those graphs, again, we have one for every one of our stations. And you can view, those ones do usually show a little bit of diurnal variability. So you can tell when the sun comes up, um, when the sun goes down. But again, it'll vary, like the temperatures that you observe today would be different than what you'd observe, um, in May when there's no crops.
Right,
Um,
yeah. Yeah, because once the ground starts to get covered, then it would be cooler probably, right?
yeah, you're gonna have the plants protecting the soil and shading it. And we also have our sun angles are different throughout the season as well. So um,
Mhm.
it
Yeah, so
that
that's
has an impact.
actually, if they were wanting to know, it'd probably be good just to grab a station that's closer to their place, and then they can kind of watch as to seeing what the temperature is. But it, like you say, it's going to be variable and changing as the season goes.
Right. If I could just share my screen for a quick second, I have a station pulled up.
Perfect. Yeah, go ahead.
So here's the station at Brandon. And we have, if you scroll all the way down, you can see this is the soil temperature graph. So it shows the soil temperature at all four depths. So we measure at 5, 20, 50, and 100 centimeters. And you can see the deeper depth soil temperatures are not changing very much during the day because they're deep in the soil, nicely shaded. And here's the 5 centimeter one. So you can see um, the diurnal variation. So we have our dates down here, so you can see early in the morning when it's dark, the temperatures aren't that high, and then they rise over the day. And as the temperatures outside get hotter, your soil temperatures are going to be warmer too. Not sure this is the best example because it looks like our 20 centimeter one is showing a little high. Um, and you can also view, we have a map of soil temperatures as well. So if you go to our current weather viewer map and choose the soil temperature tab, um, this gives you, you can choose what depth you're looking at. So if you want to look at the 5 centimeter depth and zoom in, you can get a regional perspective on the current soil temperatures at all of our stations.
No, that's pretty cool. Good. Good. Okay, thanks, Allison.
Yep.
Okay, and the second part of that question was, what is the impact on emerging seedlings in almost dry soils? Well, in almost dry soils, if they're emerging, I think that's probably the first the first hurdle that's made over, because there was enough moisture to get the seed to actually germinate and get going. So it's going to be making it above the or coming through the soil. So that's the first hurdle. The next thing is to keep it alive and going. And sometimes what happens is some of those, depending on the crop, some seem to be a little bit more, have a little more strength once they get going, and can develop some root systems and get up and go. Some of our weaker ones off the start, maybe some of this, like the smaller seeds that have less of a bank for themselves to live off, maybe can't handle it as much. And as temperatures get hotter, as it comes through the ground, and if the soil temperature is fairly warm, they're not going to last as long. So what we can see in some of those cases is some of those plants will die off if they don't get moisture that they require to keep going. And some of the other ones, if they are able to establish a root system and get some moisture, in a lot of cases in the past, what we've seen is stunted plants and plants that just don't develop the way they should normally develop. So that's I guess one of the things about not getting enough moisture to get the crop off and going, and in seeding into dry soils. I know it's not the best seeding into dry soils, but a lot of times if you don't get the rain, there's not going to be a crop anyway. So trying to put it deeper into moisture sometimes isn't the answer. So I hope that answers the question. And we will go to the next one. And this is for Kim Brown, and going to make a few comments about crop staging for spring.
Yeah, thanks, Lionel. I'm glad Dennis is in the room with me, because we were going to talk about peas, because we're getting lots of comments in now about, where my peas are at. And I think we talked about this last week, and the last couple of weeks we've been telling people to really be watching their pea staging. I know a lot of peas now are beyond that 6-node stage. So there's been some questions come up on that. What can we do after the 6-node stage? There aren't any magical products that you can spray after 6-node stage. If you do choose to still spray something like an Odyssey or a Viper, beyond the 6-node stage, you could expect to see more crop damage coming from that. If you need to get the weeds out, then you need to do that. And but you would expect to see some yellowing and possibly some crop stunting for a bit. It kind of shuts the plants down for a bit. They can turn really yellow. The only thing you can do about that is to use as much water as you can, and spray under the best conditions that you can. So early in the morning or later on at night when the crops aren't under heat stress from the day. Beyond that, then I think for other crops, we're just watching our canolas coming along nicely, and I think we're good to go. It's starting to cabbage over. So if you're going to be doing some later applications in canola, make sure that you're still able to hit the weeds, that they're not all being covered up by the canola. But you want to make sure that you can still hit the weeds and but give yourself enough time in between herbicide applications. If you're doing multiple applications on crops like corn or canola, where you're doing a couple of Liberty shots on the canola or a couple of shots of glyphosate on corn or Roundup Ready canola, then you want to give yourself 10 days in between the applications, just to give the crops time to recover. I forgot to mention too, there is Bazagran on peas. That is I guess that's your, I don't want to call it a Hail Mary, but pretty much that's what it is. And so that is a product that you can use. That's just straight bentazone. That is in Viper. That is part of Viper, but that's straight bentazone, and there are no restrictions. You can put that on up until flowering on peas. So, I mean, we don't have that much time left, but you do have that. It's a contact herbicide. You need lots of water with that. Like, you need to be spraying 20 gallons if you can, or more if you can. And that is probably the only thing left that's going to burn off some of those weeds. And as the weeds get bigger, the contact herbicides don't work as great on them. But that is the only product left that you could use safely. Beyond that, if you're out of staging, then you're out of staging for your peas. One thing I wanted to mention about wheat is that as our crops are rapidly going through their growth stages, you have to be careful when you're using a product like Vero, or that's also in Velocity. That's the thion carbazone. That's the grass part of that. that's what Vero is. And like I said, it's also in Velocity. It's in there with Infinity as well. Be careful if you can feel a node on the stem. So if you can feel a bump on the stem, then use a different product. You need to not use that product, and that's on their label. It's in our product pages in the guide. So just watch that one. If you're planning on still spraying some Vero or Velocity, then check your wheat carefully and make sure that you're still in the appropriate stage to use that product safely.
Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. Got another question for you, Kim. Producer in this situation was looking at, he still has his second application to spray of, and this is a Liberty tolerant canola. This kochia is starting to get big. When, I guess this question was, when should he get spraying? Because there's still a lot of little things still germinating. And how late can he go with kochia before it starts to be an issue?
Well, that is getting big now. Obviously the earlier you spray, the better, especially with kochia. It loves this warm weather, and it's really popping, like it's really, really growing. That's a tough one. If he's already done one application, although that canola looks fairly young to have already had an application on it. With Liberty, you have to wait until cotyledon stage. And then, you want to come back again when the canola is a bit bigger. Anytime you're going to go after that, you need to use lots and lots of water. Again, that's a contact herbicide. Kochia is a harder to wet weed because there's lots of fine hairs on those leaf surfaces. And so they are harder to get that chemical right down onto the leaf surface so it can be absorbed. But I wouldn't want to leave that too much longer. At this time of year, like right here in Carmen, we're still very, very dry. We've not had any kind of moisture in the last month almost. And so if you do a scrape back, so you take your trowel or like a seed depth checker or something, sturdy, and scrape back the top of the soil, and you can kind of see what weeds are germinating, but maybe haven't broken through the surface yet. This is a good way to check for volunteer canola. If you do that, then you can, and you can kind of see if there's more weeds coming. Now, some of the other areas that have had recent rains, I would expect that you would be getting another flush of weeds. And so you might want to wait just a day or two more for that, but I wouldn't wait too much longer. That canola is already getting bigger. And normally, like with something like a Liberty, you don't want it to get too terribly big because you're just got contact herbicide there.
Okay, and this one, soybean field, and looks like he's going to have a ton of volunteer canola coming. How long does he wait for his first application? Because there looks like there's going to be more coming as well. Like, how big can canola be before you need to worry about getting it's a Liberty canola is what he's assuming. So
yeah, and I'm sure there's some Roundup Ready canola in there too, because there always is. So I would definitely be spraying something else in with the glyphosate. I'm a Viper fan. That's always worked really well for us to take out that canola. In some, it depends on the area of the province. Sometimes you wait and you put the Viper in on the second pass to make sure you get all the canola. But if it's mostly Liberty canola, you'll get it with either glyphosate application. Again, I would do a scrape back and I'd see how much more is coming, but just looking at that picture, I bet there's probably more coming because those are all about the same stage. They're all germinating right now. I bet there's a bunch more right below the surface. You'll just see they look like little white threads almost coming up, and you'll see them recently germinated, but they haven't cracked the surface yet. I wouldn't be afraid of, if you're going to do 2 applications, then, do an application now and give yourself the 10 days. I mean, we're already at middle of June. These things will start flowering usually by July or so, Dennis, beginning of July, because they're based on that longest day, shortest night type trigger, which is June 21st, I believe. So usually within about a week or 10 days after that, we start to see flowering. So you don't have an awful lot of time left to get 2 applications in safely. So I wouldn't be afraid to put one on now and then wait my 10 days and do another one. Again, if you've just recently had rain, do that scrape back and see how many more of those are coming to the surface, but you need to get rid of those. That looks like a lot of volunteer canola.
okay, and just to comment, your mentioning about increasing water volumes is working, because I'm talking to more and more producers that are spraying more water this year than I've seen in the past few years. So
Yeah, and it's free. Water's free. It's the cheapest thing. It's the free thing that you put in your tank. So you're almost always better to go with, you can get away with lower chem rates. I mean, still on label chem rates, but you don't have to go to the highest chem rates if you're just using more water. It takes the same amount of time to spray that, whether you're doing 10 gallons, 15 gallons or more, but when you're actual spraying, it doesn't take any longer. But you do need to get a good system for filling. We have a lot of sprayer downtime when we're doing our fills. And so anything you can do to make that a more efficient part of the spraying operation, it makes spraying the high water volumes a little bit less painful. But I know it is hard when you start switching to higher water volumes. When you look at all the stopping and filling, it's, like I said, it can feel quite painful, but it is absolutely worth it. And we need to be doing that because of herbicide resistance. We have so many weeds now that we're having to watch. And we need to do everything we can to spray better, make every drop count, and using as much water as you can. That's a huge part of that. That's one of the biggest parts of that, is using lots of water and getting really good coverage and making the spray that you have in the tank work the best it can.
great. Thanks, Kim. John Gavlowski, I mentioned at the beginning that I was hearing a bit about some grasshopper activity in some areas in the western side of the province here. I was just wanting you to maybe make some general comments of what you've been seeing and hearing province-wide.
Sure. So we are well into the hatch now. I don't think it's done yet, but we're well into it. What we're seeing in the Carmen area here is a lot of the very young instars for the pest species. There's some non-pest species that are already adults, but those ones we don't really need to be concerned about. But the pest species, most are right now in the first couple instars, but we are starting to see some with wing buds. So that lower picture on your screen, you can see two grasshoppers, and these are grasshoppers that are starting to get their wing buds. In fact, the one on the right, you can see the wing buds, those little, there's the two stripes on the thorax, but behind that, there's two black wing buds, at least the tips of them are black, and they're going about halfway down the abdomen. So when it gets to that stage, you're getting into your, so that one would likely be a fourth instar. When you start seeing those wing buds on most of your grasshoppers, that's when hatch is generally wrapping up. We're still seeing a lot of grasshoppers for the pest species without wing buds yet, but we are starting to see some with. I'm thinking another, probably 1 to maybe 2 weeks max, the hatch should be done. If you have a very heavy population of grasshoppers around a field, and you're trying to decide on when's the best time to target control, should it need it, the general rule is once most of the grasshoppers have wing buds, hatch is probably done or just about, and that's the ideal time to be treating. Now, you do want to keep an eye on things. If you've got a very heavy population already moving into a crop and doing significant defoliation around the edges, there are times when it's best to be spraying a little bit on the earlier side before most of them have the wing buds, just to protect the crop that's there. If you're doing that, you might want to consider using something with a bit more residual to it. That way, the remaining hatch that occurs hopefully is still getting killed by the insecticide. Otherwise, the risk of going too early for the field edge control is that you end up doing it a second time if there's too much hatch that hasn't happened yet. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Like I said, a lot of early instars, some with wing buds. That's what you want to be keeping an eye on. And certainly keep an eye on the levels. If you find areas that look like they've got some very heavy populations, sometimes it's easier to deal with them when they're still concentrated around the edges rather than later on.
Okay, the one field I was in, the grass was kind of looked like it was moving. So I know when we do our surveys in the fall, we don't really do counts, but like, what would you recommend, or how would you kind of make that decision if you need to spray or not?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, and it gets tricky because when levels are really high, there's really no way that you can um, you can count. You've got a lot of grasshoppers jumping every step you take, and there's no way that you can do a proper count. Um, you're doing estimates, really, is what you're doing. So um, uh, walk the field edges, have a look, and certainly when it's at the point where every step you take, you've got this massive movement of grasshoppers around your feet. Uh, that's probably telling you you're getting to the point where things could be economical. Now, if people are looking for some guidelines, we do have some recommendations that we put in our fact sheets. They are nominal guidelines for you. What we suggest is that anything over about 25 plus grasshoppers along roadsides is probably a situation where control is usually required. And then we've got this middle category that we say 13 to 24 may be required. And so things are a bit vague there. That really depends on what the crop is that you're dealing with, the potential value of the crop, the growing conditions, is it capable of compensating for some grasshopper feeding? There's lots of things to factor in. So that's hence that vague middle category, but certainly anything under about 13, so 0 to 12 range per meter square is not a population that you need to be worried about when you're doing that roadside field edge scouting.
Okay, thanks, John.
Welcome.
Just a couple pictures here. We had milkweed on last week, and had someone find it again themselves, and they sent me pictures and saying that they seen it on the CropTalk, and they seen it this edge of a field or in the field, so they grabbed some pictures. So good to see that guys are getting good information. Okay, the weed guide is available at your ag service centers, so make sure you pick those up. Crop diversification centers are going to be having their field days. Melita on July the 9th, Passaic on July 25th, PCDF on August 2nd, and MCDC on August 9th. We're going to be having the managers of those those sites on our CropTalk in the near future here. So they'll be able to go through the stuff that they have out there and let you know what's going on. Marla, I found this advertisement and was wanting to see if you wanted to maybe mention a couple things. I guess one of the things I found really interesting that you're getting 400 to 500 people attending each year, which I think is amazing. So
yeah, that's our kind of a general number that we've seen over the years. It's always great. We have a lot of experienced agronomists and junior agronomists that come out every year. And the school is an excellent space to kind of renew some agronomic knowledge, I guess, and get a chance to see us make mistakes so that you guys don't have to. So we have, our school is being advertised right now. We have 5 days for kind of general registration for agronomists. So July 5th, 6th, and then the 11th to the 13th. We start sharp at 8:30 in the morning. Registration will be at 8. And we run until 3 o'clock. So we did this last year. We cut out a little bit earlier, so we're not in the dead of the heat of the day at 3 o'clock and trying to suffer through until 4:30 like we have been in the past. We will offer CEUs again for CCAs, so it's a great place to come and get those credits for getting onto your 2-year cycle and making sure that you've got that covered. So if you are looking to register, you can send an email to mbcropschool@gmail.com. That is our crop diagnostics school website or email address. you let me know your name, how many people you are registering, and what day you would like to register for, as well as any dietary restrictions we need to know about, because of course lunch and snacks are provided during the day. So feel free to send in your registration information. We'll get back to you to let you know that we've registered you for that day, and then we will follow up with an invoice for payment.
And I just put up the Farmer Day.
Absolutely. So we've also got Farmer Day. So the break in the regular schedule is for Friday, July 7th. So Farmer Day is being put on and is sponsored by MCA, MPSG, and MCGA. And so it's a $75 cost for farmers. However, if you are a member for all three of the organizations, then it's free to you, because those organizations will be covering your cost. If you're not a member, that's okay. You can still attend and still register. So same thing, send an email to mbcropschool@gmail.com. Let us know that you are registering for Farmer Day. In that case, we need your name, and a farm name is helpful as well. Just so that we can run that by the commodity associations. That gives them a chance to say, yeah, we recognize these people, they are members, and then we go ahead with registration. So we look forward to seeing people, either farmers on July 7th or the rest of you agronomy folks during the other 5 days of school this year.
Great, thanks, Marla. Contact information for the crop production extension specialists are given here. So if you need any help with anything, lots of stuff happening in the fields now. So if you got any questions, feel free to contact any one of these people. Today is the last day for the fencing and watering workshops put on by the livestock group. Today, Ken Overby Farm, and that is located around the St. Laurent area. And then also this afternoon in Beausejour at Broken Head Ag Society is putting it on, and then there'll be one at the CPTC grounds, and that one starts at 3 o'clock and goes till 6. If you've got questions regarding that, these are the contact people for our livestock group. Also, if you weren't able to attend, I'm sure they could get you information of what was going on during those meetings. And if you've got questions, I'm sure they can help you through with any of the stuff. Our MASC service centers. So pretty soon you're going to be needed to do your seeded acreage reports. I know that deadline is probably coming up, so make sure you've got on top of all that kind of stuff. And if you've got any other questions, there's mine and Lori's contact information, and join us next week, June 21st, as we hopefully are getting close to done spraying, and hopefully not seeing any more major storms. So thanks for attending, and see you then.